Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel. I'm Fran Minushkin, co-chair, along with Susanna Reich of Penn American Center's Children and Young Adult Writers Committee. Before we start, I'd like to say a few quick words about Penn American Center. We're the largest of the 141 centers of International Penn, the world's oldest human rights organization. Our membership of 3,000 writers, editors, and translators works to defend free expression and foster international literary fellowship. Our Children's and Young Adult Committee is the only one on Penn devoted to a specific genre of literature, and we're an active and close community. We have monthly meetings, which any Penn member can attend. We support writers and librarians when children's books are challenged in schools or libraries. We administer the Phyllis Reynolds Naylor $5,000 Writing Fellowship, and we've adopted a school in New Orleans, which 6 of our authors have visited in the last 2 years. Our writers also have an active presence on the Penn website, which includes videos and audios of our previous panels. We're always happy to welcome new members, so speak to any of us after the program. After the session, the writers will be available for book signings at the table outside the auditorium, and there'll also be information about other Penn events in this wonderful festival. And now I'll turn over the microphone to my co-chair, Susanna Reich.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Voyage of the Reader, using children's books to create a lifelong love of reading. I'd like to thank the panelists for joining us today, and I'd also like to thank the Cervantes Institute for hosting us, and the Penn staff, and Susan Cookland and Fran Minushkin for all of their work in helping to coordinate the panel. I am going to introduce Benjamin Schrank, who's the moderator of this panel. Ben is president and publisher of Razor Bill, an imprint of Penguin Young Readers Group. He has written 2 novels for adults, Miracle Man and Consent, as well as the Insider series for young adults. As an editor, Ben works primarily on middle grade and young adult fiction. 2 of his recently edited books are Allegra Goodman's debut YA novel, The Other Side of the Island, and 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher. When I asked Ben what he likes best about editing books for children and young adults, he said, "I've always loved working with kids because of their openness to new and innovative material." So we're all looking forward to what Ben and the panelists have to share with us this afternoon, and I'd like you to welcome them now.
Hello. I'm Ben Schrank, and I'm welcome you to the 2009 Penn World Voices Festival. And I'm just going to quickly go through. On behalf of the 3,400 writers, translators, and editors of Penn, it's our great pleasure to welcome you to the 5th Annual Penn World Voices Festival. I know you've heard some of this before, of international literature. To further Penn's mission to advance literature, defend free expression, and foster international literary fellowship, the festival brings together writers from across the globe for a truly international literary and cultural exchange. I believe you've already had a housekeeping warning about cell phones and etc. So those are off. Thank you. Okay. I'm just going to move quickly to introduce our panelists. Sorry to jam you. First, we have Ann Hoberman. Ann Hoberman was born in Stamford, Connecticut in 1930. Currently, Children's Poet Laureate. She's written more than 45 books for children, all but 1 in verse. A House is a House for Me won a National Book Award, and the You Read to Me, I'll Read to You series has been on the New York Times bestseller list. In 2003, Hoberman received the Award for Excellence in Children's Poetry, given by the National Council of Teachers of English. She recently co-edited an anthology of poetry with fellow Penn member Linda Winston, The Tree That Time Built, which will be published in October. Next is Francine Prose. Francine Prose was president of Penn America Center from 2007 to 2009. She's the author of more than 20 books, including A Changed Man, winner of the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, Blue Angel, a finalist for the National Book Award, Hunters and Gatherers, Bigfoot Dreams, Primitive People, and many other novels, short story collections, and nonfiction books. Her most recent novel is Golden Grove. A distinguished critic and essayist, she has taught literature and writing for more than 20 years at major universities. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic Monthly, GQ, and the Paris Review. She's a contributing editor at Harper's, and she writes regularly on art for the Wall Street Journal. The recipient of Guggenheim and Fulbright Fellowships, NEA grants, and a Penn Translation Prize, she's currently a distinguished writer in residence at Bard College. Prose lives in New York City. Her tribute to Grace Paley was published in PEN America 8, Making Histories, and her remarks on surveillance in the United States can be found in PEN America 9, Checkpoints. Next is Meir Shalev, to my left. Meir Shalev was born in 1948 in Nahalal, Israel's first moshav. He is a best-selling author in Israel, Holland, and Germany, and his work has been translated into more than 20 languages. Shalev is the recipient of the Juliet Club Prize, the Prime Minister's Prize, the Chiavari, the Entomological Prize, the Ouizo Prize in France, Israel and Italy, and the 2008 National Jewish Book Award, and the 2006 Brenner Prize, the highest Israeli literary recognition for his most recent novel, A Pigeon and a Boy. He studied psychology at Hebrew University in Jerusalem and produced and hosted several radio and television programs. He's written 12 children's books as well as 4 collections of essays. He's also a columnist with the Israeli daily Yediot Aharonot. He participated in World Voices event on love and sex and literature, which was published in PEN America 7, World Voices. He lives in Jerusalem with his wife and children. And finally, Vera B. Williams. Vera B. Williams was born in California in 1927. Williams, creator of many distinguished books for young readers, was the U.S. Illustrator nominee for the 2004 Hans Christian Andersen Award. Her books include The Great Watermelon Birthday, Lucky Song, 3 Days on a River in a Red Canoe, Something Special for Me, A Chair for My Mother, Music for Everyone, and Cherries and Cherry Pits. Her tribute to Grace Paley was published in PEN America 8, Making Histories. I'll just go on for a little bit longer. The panel today is the voyage of the reader, using children's books to create a lifelong love of reading. And the question that we've been asked is, how do authors create and hold on to young readers in the electronic world? The panel will be more or less in 4 brief parts. The first is we're going to address the question of the digital book and how it will affect storytelling, especially I think in picture books, given the panel that we have today. The next part is the concept of non-educational versus educational children's literature, and where these authors stand. And again, how this concept addresses the upcoming, I've written digital divide here, that may be debatable. The third part is the idea of speech, memory, and performance, and even repetition as it relates to holding on to young readers, and perhaps, again, this issue of the electronic book. And finally, we'll have a Q&A for about the last 10 or 15 minutes. So let's begin with this question of the digital book. I have a visual aid to start us out. I am a publisher, and one thing that I think we all talk about a lot. We have lots of meetings, and we talk a lot about the future, the digital book, and the reading the book on the phone and what that could possibly mean. The transition sort of, to me, looks something like this. This is just promo from any number of companies who are saying, here's what the digital book will be. We have on our right someone with a lot of books, and on my left someone with a digital book. And that's just basically it. It looks like, a piece of paper. It'll be a little thicker and it'll hold a lot of books. And I think the big question is for our panelists, I have this pile of books in front of me, is how are they going to address this issue? Does this issue need addressing, and what does it mean for each of them? Whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, God knows. When Ben sent various questions around to us via email, and I wrote back saying, I don't know why I'm on this panel at all. I'm no spring chicken, and he advised us to read an article that went into this in more detail than I could even fathom. And I gave it to my husband to read, and I said, what's this? And luckily, my mother always used to say, oh, I'm glad I won't be alive, And, I sort of feel that way. And I'm also very thankful that I do picture books, because I can't imagine curling up with a good Kindle with a child. And so I wonder if perhaps, since Vera and my audience audiences are mainly illiterates, whether we might be a little exempt from this. Anyway.
You are not exempt. I think that's the big issue. Is what I hear every day is this: you're not exempt. I mean, is it? What does it mean to the possibility of transition?
Well, I responded to you in a similar vein on email and quoted myself about reading with very young children, which I actually think has a lot to say about this whole thing. But, you know, in just practical answer to whether we are exempt and also how you are going to best electronic media, no one knows. I imagine if you asked in Gutenberg's day what was going to happen to the hand-painted book, nobody would have been able to answer you. But exempt from history, we are not. Even I am not in my extreme 80s. No, I'm not that old, but at 82, you're not exempt from history. So, so it is worthwhile to explore it, but I don't feel I have any answer or certainty in it. But I'm glad to talk about it because the roots of language and words and the pleasure in being read to, possibly the distaste in it that some people have, the origin of story, which will be there with the Kindle and was there when somebody stood by a fire and told the story, and when people sit and tell what happened yesterday, and as Grace Paley used to say, gossip is the root of stories. That's all going to be there. So.
Yeah, sure. I feel that the revolution, Gutenberg gave us the revolution of printing, and before the revolution of inventing the alphabet as opposed to drawing and hieroglyphs, were far greater than the electronic revolution, because as far as I can see it, when we deal with the electronic books, it has to do more with the marketing, copyright, how do you, what's your access to the book, whether it will be through the internet or in a shop or discs, or how will the author get his royalties, or how can people protect their rights. But when we come to literature, when we come to the reader and the writer, there is still the fact of there is somebody who tells a story and writes a text, and there is somebody who illustrates for children, or there is somebody who does both. And there is the reader, the viewer, and there is nothing in the electronic way of presenting these books that change this very basic fact.
Well, the obvious thing to say, which is no less true for being obvious, is that reading a book is a sensual act, and there's no way that reading a machine can approach it. I mean, you hold a book, you turn the pages, and so forth. My 2-year-old granddaughter, who, as far as I can tell, is illiterate, loves to read. I mean, she holds the book. That is, she holds the book. She loves to sit there and turn the pages in the way that she sees other family members. I have been asked many times, what about the book versus the Kindle? Will you ever get an electronic reader? And I would say, no, a book is a book. I can only have a book. Well, I have a little confession to make, which is I bought a Kindle. I was going to Japan. I had my usual terror of being stranded in an airport somewhere without 4,000 books to read to get me through. So I bought one just because I didn't want to lug the 70 books around with me. But, Ben, could you hold that picture up one more time?
Sure.
I'd like to suggest that the person on that side, the person with the Kindle, was originally the person on the other side. I mean, that is, the love of reading, I think, comes from actual books and then can be transferred for reasons of expediency, not wanting to carry the weight of books. But I can't, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine someone falling in love with that machine with the little clicker in quite the same way.
I just wanted to say in the article that you sent advised us to read. Meir, when you said that you think it's just a mechanical thing and that's the only change there's going to be, but the person who wrote that article was saying that actually the narrative procession is changing. When you can come to something in your Kindle or on your computer and then say, aha, that's interesting, I'll branch off there. You might not even come back to your book. You might get something that, so perhaps, you know, there's going to be a whole new way of reading, and I don't know if it's going to be as reading as we know it, and that is disturbing.
Well, it doesn't frighten me, and I know that even today with the good old book, there are readers, I don't know if you know it, but there are readers who stop after 3 pages and throw our book away, and there are readers who go back to the same page again and again, and they are doing in a primitive way things that are easier to do with an electronic book, and the moment the book is written, readers can do whatever they want with it, especially in children books with illustrations when they want to see the frightening picture again and again. And I think that we are a little bit romantic about the old book. Imagine, I guess, the revolution of when they stopped chiseling words on rocks and started to write them on papyruses and parches, and people said, what? From now on people can carry their books with them, they will not have to come to the walls and read it from the wall and pay attention and do all this. I think people are a little afraid of revolutions, and I don't see anything dangerous in this revolution. I think that the fact we are able to write on a word processor is far more revolutionary than the fact that a reader can read from a computer.
I think maybe to just expand the question, which I think are certainly, we'll assume, you know, a sophistication, high level of sophistication in the audience, and then say, from this though, noting, for instance, the CD-ROM, which I think a lot of people talked about and said, oh, it's going to change the way we read, and you know, we'll look at pieces of history and we'll have this multimedia experience, and there was a lot of talk about that, and then it didn't. I think we can all agree it completely didn't happen, and yet the same thing comes up again. And I guess I want to see whether the whole panel takes a hard line on this question of imagining picture books, let's say, as a discrete thing or as a malleable thing. And I guess my anecdote would be, apropos of your discussion of negotiating rights, I was once talking to an agent, and we were figuring out who got what, and coming into areas that none of us truly understand, and she suggested that if the words got up and danced, that belonged not to the publishing house, and it raised all kinds of interesting questions. So I'm wondering about that, about whether the words, how you would feel if the words got up and danced.
The words do get up and dance.
Well, okay.
I took my grandson who loved the Iliad to see a performance of it, and the words got up and danced and sang. I mean, that's a little stretching it, because as an illustrator, I immediately begin to imagine that the words themselves had little feet. That's what you mean, right? You don't mean people dressed as words, or people dancing and saying words. But and that's all a little bit silly, but it isn't really, because if you take a little bit different side of this question, which is, do we really care so much what thing people read from, or whether they listen to words or watch them, or get them from the TV or the radio? What we have to think about is creating people who value stories, words, scientific information, and it may be that these various elements of our literary outputs and all would do better in different areas. For instance, it seems to me true, perhaps because I am a picture book writer and creator, that the picture book is lodged very much in books, or has been for a long time. Before the books were easily available to people, the picture books of the Bible, for instance, were made of glass, and you only got to see them once a week. or they were on the ceilings or the floors, and those were the illustrations of the stories you knew. If you go to an exhibit, I went this year to an exhibit of 18th century and 17th century embroidery, and there was the Bible embroidered, and classical stories too. So I'm actually more interested in how we connect stories to love and to our what we care about in life than in what we get them from.
If I may, I just want to add a soothing remark. I write, I think, in the oldest language written today, which is Hebrew. I mean, oldest in the sense that the texts that were written in Hebrew 3,000 years ago can still be understood, at least in Israel, by 10 years old kids who read not all the text, but a major part of it can still be understood by little children who can read this language in which I write my modern day stories. And the Hebrew language and words and sentences and plots and stories survived all kind of technical medias, from stone to clay to leather to paper to computers today, and nothing principally have changed in the words and sentences themselves.
You've totally reassured me.
Good, I'm happy.
I have to say, the honest truth is that I don't worry about this very much. I mean, I don't sit around worrying about electronic books versus books. What I do worry about is literacy. I worry about living in a country in which the educational system is so substandard and so purposely planned to be substandard that people can't read, and it doesn't make any difference whether it's a book or a screen or a reader or so. I mean, that's the real problem, not the form on which they're going to read it. And it seems to me that that's more, what we're talking about in the panel. What we're trying to do is to get people who actually want to read, regardless of the form they're reading it in, or the electronics involved or not.
So, yeah. So we could transition there to this second question of this, and maybe this concept of educational versus non-educational literature, and where you stand as authors in this drive to get kids to read is what is your responsibility, and what is your responsibility to pure entertainment, and how do you make this happen? How do you feel about how you make this happen?
Could you say that question again?
Well, I'm sort of fusing these two or three questions, but what I'm saying, we had talked a little in the green room about this idea of educational literature and what that means. Maybe I'd just stay that broad. What does that mean to you in terms of your responsibility to getting people to read, kids to read?
Well, yeah, I can answer that from my own experience. I, as you said, write verse for children. And I write it to delight, to bring joy, to have fun. I love the language. And I have the experience of educational publishers taking a 4-line poem of mine and embedding it in 2 pages of, you do this with that, you do this with that, etc. And it absolutely is dead on arrival. And so this whole business of making reading and making what should be joyful and fun and into a chore and into something that becomes homework, and you have to do this before you do that, and then connecting, taking a little poem and then sort of saying, well, this will work for our science project, and this will work for that, etc. And what does this mean? And I think that there's a great problem there as far as my own stuff is concerned. And when I was thinking about this today, when I was a little girl, long time ago, my mother would say to me, Well, you get your nose out of that book and go outside and get some fresh air and play. And when did we make the transition to, you know, you have to read that book, you come in here, and that's what you're supposed to do with yourself. Reading to me was a secret pleasure. It was done under the bedclothes at night with a flashlight. It was, look at this nearsighted lady. I mean, you know, I've had these glasses on my nose since I was 10 years old. And all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, perhaps it was gradual, something happened to the pleasure of reading, to going to the library and coming home with a great armful of books and losing yourself in those stories. So that is my contribution to this part of the panel.
Well, I don't think it's our responsibility exactly. I mean, I think all we do is write. So what do we want to do? We want to write something that's beautiful, engaging, interesting. The same, you know, and it doesn't matter if you're writing for children or teenagers or adults. You know, the responsibility for how it's used in the school system is the responsibility of the school system and the governments. And I think if we want to be active in that way, we should be active as citizens as much as we are as writers. I mean, that is, you know, if the government passes a bill like No Child Left Behind, which is essentially designed to destroy children's pleasure in every possible area of learning, then there's a limit to what we can do to counteract that. So I think all of that has to come, you know, we're just like grocers, basically. You know, we're just doing what we can do. But I think all of that has to come from someplace else, and we have to work in another sphere, really, of activism, really, to try and change that system.
Well, I happen to be interested in both writing books, making pictures, and sharing them with children. And I've been asked to participate in a lot of efforts to bring the enjoyment of reading, and since it's usually often school-based, the skill of reading to as many children as possible. And I find it a little hard to be really interested in words and what you have to tell in telling without having somewhat of a pedagogical bent. I think it's good to resist a pedagogical bent if you're a writer for children. Sometimes when I'm talking to children, I apologize and say, I'm going to tell you a story and it has a moral, you know, so I'll tell you that right away, so you won't.
I won't spoil the story.
I won't be secretly feeding this to you. But I have been very interested in many of the efforts to bring reading as a part of life to very little children, reading to babies. I sent you a quote of something I'd written for a little book called Reading with Babies that my friend Susan Straub put out. She had a lot of experience working in the school with mothers who had had babies while they were in high school. So the mothers and the babies were reading together. And I came to really grasp an element in reading for very young children and in having a book that you can turn the pages of, that you can bury your head in, that you can grasp as an artifact, and in which the story comes to pass by the turning of pages. That, as we have said, may disappear, but right now it is this adventure of reading that you are passing on. And when you're passing it on to little children, it comes with a lot of the same thing that comes with feeding babies, with washing babies, right? And that's a love for them, and a physical pleasure in their presence. You snuggle with the baby to read to it, right? The baby maybe walks away with the book biting on the end of it or schlepping it along the floor, you know. You playfully follow the baby and pick it up, you kiss it, and you read it some more, you know. And you can easily grasp how, over a couple of years of this, the words, the rhythm and nursery rhymes, all those things get into the fiber of a person and create what is probably a long-lasting, maybe not lifelong, maybe when the person is 12 they will say, I am not going to read any more books, I'm out of this for a while. But it's there, I think. And so people who like to do that and who also write books, I think, are finding now many avenues to do it in, and to switch it from this thing that No Child Left Behind wasn't set out to do, I think, but certainly became, and what all the testing becomes. And when my books, I just want to say this, and I'll turn it over. When people first asked to put like A Chair for My Mother into collections, and then I would say, I want to see what it's going to look like in a collection, and I want to see the questions, because the questions were often so reductionist and sort of boring. And it seemed to me that the children, you've told this story, you've given them whatever you have, you've made these pictures. They're little human beings. There's a lot they don't know, there's a lot they know, there's a lot they make up, they imagine, and like that, that's what it's for. And these questions took no notice of any of that. You want them to go from the reading year after year and whatever it is they're reading with their imaginations and their curiosity and their emotional responses developed, certainly not diminished.
I shall tell you a little story. When my younger son was 3 years old, he once asked me to tell him a story. Many times he used to tell me what the story should be about. He told me the story, I only had to put it in words. So he said, today I want you to tell me a story in which I will be a little boy who is lost in the jungle, and you will be a big lion, but an old lion with no teeth left in his mouth. And then I understood that children really like to be scared from books, but they want this fright to be under some kind of control and supervision. And years later, he's now 25, years later I wrote a book which I think is based upon this request. It's a book about a little boy who wakes up at night hearing roars of an animal, of a big animal, and he sees a lion in the garden. The next night the lion gets closer to the window. The next night the lion is already in the house. And then the boy is so afraid that he takes a stick and he runs after the lion with the stick, and the lion is afraid, runs away from him. And with all that running and jumping around, the lion sort of falls apart, and it is a lion suit in which the father and the mother of the boy are together. This book got a lot of psychoanalytical attention in Israel. I got very controversial letters from parents about it. Many of them liked it a lot. Others asked where they can get such a suit, and all of them admitted that the kids love this book maybe even more than my nicer books. And then I got a letter from the Israeli parliament asking me to come to a discussion in the Committee for the Welfare of Little Children in Israel, who got complaints from an association of psychologists and kindergarten teachers complaining about this specific book, who presents the relationships between children and parents in a pervertic manner and frightens little children to death. And I refused this kind invitation, because I said if I go there I recognize the fact of the authorities to discuss literature, they had their discussion. I was interviewed to the papers. It made some attention in Israel. I said that I'm proud to be with one distinguished group with brothers Grimm and Mark Twain, who were also blamed for such accusations. When Mark Twain published Huckleberry Finn, it was Louisa May Alcott of Little Women who demanded his books should be removed from American public libraries because of his language and his stories. And today we all know where she is and where Mark Twain is.
Well, they're
anyway,
that's right.
and for me, I prefer to be on the side of Brothers Grimm and Mark Twain, and not on the side of Aesop, La Fontaine, and Louisa May Alcott.
Oh.
And if I may add one more thing, since I mentioned the Brothers Grimm. The question is whether the writer wanted to be educational, not if the book is educational. The book can become educational even without the writer meaning to write such a book. For example, when you read Little Red Riding Hood, and there are many parents today who will not read this story to their children because it's frightening and because it has this dark sexual quality about it. But when a kid is being read this book, I think children ask themselves many interesting questions concerning Little Red Riding Hood. Not only the story of the wolf and the don't go alone in the forest and things, and don't talk to strangers and things like this. Like, where is the father in this book? There are three women, a daughter, a mother, and a grandmother. Isn't there a father to protect his child in this book? Or how come the only masculine characters are a hunter who is a stranger and a wolf who is not human at all? How come the mother sends her daughter to the forest knowing there is a wolf there? Does it have to do with the fact that father is away at the same time? You know, things like this are under the text. They are not intentional, they are not direct, but they are under the text, and children feel this kind of information, which is not told to them in a direct way. And I think this is the importance of good children literature.
Okay, let's. Sorry.
A couple of weeks ago, I went and talked to a class at NYU, an undergraduate class, and what the students wanted to talk about essentially was why would anyone bother to read books anymore when there's so many good video games out there that you can play. And apparently at NYU you can take a number of classes in video games, designing and I don't know what, playing. So so the student said to me, oh, you know, video games aren't the way you think they are, meaning me, the old relict, what did I know? You know, I said, okay, so what's the difference? And they said, well, they're much more interactive now. That is, you become the character, you know, blowing away the zombies or whatever. And I said, actually, I had a sort of problem with the idea of becoming the character. I mean, the whole point of literature, in some way, is that you're reading about people who are not you, and you're getting inside the heads of people who are not you. And half the students seemed to me to get what I was saying, and the other half didn't. And I thought, okay, those are the readers, and those aren't. But that's very educational. I mean, the idea that there are other people in the world, the idea that there are people in other times who felt the way we did, who weren't us, is a very profound form of education. And I think any decent fiction or picture books is about the fact that you're not the only person in the world, that there are other human beings, and I think it's very hard to write anything that's not educational in that way.
I just have a question about what about the practice of writing? I know Marianne had written about memorizing and repetition and then putting it down on the page afterward, and I'm interested in the idea for all of you, especially in relation to picture books, about this idea of holding on to the reader. that in a novel, someone reads a novel and loves it and puts it down and maybe reads it again sometime later. But in the picture book, there is this idea of hearing it again each night, that idea. And I wonder about, for you as writers, how does, if you could speak to a process about how you think of memory and speech and performance and repetition when you make these books, when you create them, and what makes you good at creating these books that people look at again and again and again, both children and adults.
Okay, I'll talk about what makes me good at it, right? And I'll hold up my new book in my May, okay, which this comes out next month. But I picked up a couple of copies, and they came out in Spanish and English at the same time. So I do want to, I'm just going to open to a random page for a reason other than showing it off, which of course I am a show off. But all right, I'm not being very random, am I? Okay, this has a lot of red in it, right? I gloried in painting this red. I had a nice big white brush and a damp piece of paper, and I painted away. I hadn't planned to do that when I wrote it. When I write them, I don't think about the pictures. They're word books when I write them. The pictures are words, as though they were not going to be illustrated, though I know they are. Then I start all over again to create a book in colors. I am probably a children's writer because I am very much lodged in being a child. That is, and I think this is very different for different people and people who write for different ages and all. My early childhood is very present to me in many very good, enjoyable ways. And as a child, I painted a lot, and the color meant a lot to me, and it still does. And I therefore assume that I will live in, the people who look at the pictures will live in the color just as I lived in the color making it. I never said it quite the way, but it's kind of a gift, right? I love red, I will give you this red. I will make this red as I can. And when you're trained as an artist, you learn to make colors so they come forward, they go back, they deepen, they're more intense, and as you paint, you learn that better. So, and then you try and get the printer to do it real good, you know, and they do. They've gotten very good at it. So that is one way that you know to pass on what it is you want to do, and so I do that. Another way is I decorate. It seems to me, if you look at the art from the whole world, from the beginning of time, people decorated, right? It's natural to decorate. It's a light decoration. The decoration varies a lot. It has religious significance. It doesn't. It has all kinds of traditional meanings, and it's done in every medium and all. And so I think that children like it, love it, are happy with it, might do it themselves, get a kick out of it. And that's kind of the way I create the way the book's going to look.
Well, yes?
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to echo Vera in that I have come to the conclusion that writers for children probably do live in certain years of their childhood and young adult lives, and I am fixed back in my preschool or pre-elementary and early elementary years, and I too have almost total recall of it, and that is where I live when I write, and so I have great confidence that what I write will find readers, or more listeners even than readers, because the way I write, certainly verse, but everything that I write for kids has to pass the test of the ear test as well as the eye test, and when I get something right, it delights me, and I hope that it will delight children. And now, as Children's Poet Laureate, I have this laurel wreath that I'm wearing, and I have sort of a platform. And again, what Vera was saying, as far as that probably people who love words and who write, there's a little bit of the pedagogue in them as well. I guess, Francine, that I disagree a tiny bit with you, but I think it's because I write for young kids, and a lot of our audience is, you know, you're asked to go to schools and libraries and that kind of thing. And now with this Poet Laureate thing, I feel that what I'm doing, I have this opportunity now to go around and knock people over the head and say, listen, this stuff is wonderful. Not my stuff particularly, but there's so much wonderful poetry for children. There's so much wonderful verse. And it's my mission now to go out and to teach teachers is what I want to do, and to teach parents how to say verse, how to communicate it to children. And when you talked about memorization, etc., repetition, I mean, those are my middle names, right? And memorization is such a gift, and when you're young, you've got that, you know, you've got all those brain cells up there. I'm working on one Shakespeare sonnet. I probably, by the time I die, I still won't, you know, the second one pushes the first one out of my head. But children can memorize so easily, and it's such, it's the riches of having a well-furnished mind, or a mind furnished with poetry. So you start in utero, and you start, you know, bouncing around and reading this verse and nursery rhymes and all, and you go on from there.
Do you want to say?
I have a question for my fellow panelists, which is, how many of you have actual books that you had as kids? The actual.
Oh, the physical books.
Yeah.
Oh,
the
my God,
yeah,
yes.
because I mean, one of my favorite books still is the edition of Hans Christian Andersen,
Yes.
the Arthur Zick illustrations of Hans Christian Andersen. And when I look at it, I can actually kind of recreate the sensation I had as a kid of staring at an illustration until I lost the sense of what was the picture, and entered the picture in a way that you can't, I don't think, as an adult. And that's, you know, it's a good thing my parents weren't paying attention enough to have me tested, you know, because you're so psycho. But I think that a child's experience with that, and I can see it again with my little granddaughter, is something that's going to preserve the love for picture books. You know, you just look at it and suddenly you're in it, and it's a very, very particular to childhood, and I can remember it very, very clearly.
I have Hans Christian Andersen too, but with his silhouette drawings. Yeah, read books from my childhood. Very good.
We have to transition quickly to Q&A. Does anyone want to go first? Yes. Oh, we have a microphone.
On the topic of children and literature, 10 years from now, will children be able to focus and read 500 or 600 page books like Harry Potter? Well, as a society, they have gotten that love of reading has compared to today. And setting aside parents reading to children, what would be the one thing you might suggest to society that would encourage a love of reading among children?
Well, about 10 years ago, people already said that children will not read books anymore, and then Harry Potter was published. So now you're asking what will happen in 10 years. If they will read another Harry Potter, luckily there will be another very talented writer who will write more very good books, and I think the only solution for this worry whether children will read books in the future is whether there will be writers who will write books that children will want to read. I think that as long as we will have such writers, children will read this book. There has never been in the past such a phenomena of the enthusiasm of children for books as it was for Harry Potter, and this is a very modern phenomenon. It's not something that happened 50 years ago. So I think that there is good writers will supply good books, and children will keep on reading.
Could I just add a short thing to that in a pedagogical way, which I just am, as my fellow members on the committee know. More important than, in some ways, underlying whether they will read, we have to be sure that they live, that they get taken care of, that they get fed, that they don't get poisoned by the air and the water, and that they lead that we provide for them, that they can lead a good and civil life.
Bravo.
Is there a question?
Well, could if I had to say one thing that I would do, could I legislate? I would give teachers much more control over the reading lists that are taught in their classrooms, and I would ask teachers to find books that they passionately love themselves, and they teach with that kind of enthusiasm, because so often teachers are forced to teach books that they don't even like, and that dislike of the book translates to the kids aren't idiots, they get it right away. So if every teacher got to teach a few books that he or she really cared about, I think that would make a huge difference.
And using the computer and the media, I know that there's some great things, even I, the technophobe, on the computer. For example, our little granddaughter, she must have been about 4, and we have piles of books and children's books around the house, and she found Shel Silverstein's The Cowardly Lion, and she fell in love with this book, as did I. I hadn't really read it that much before, and we found Shel reading it himself on the computer. And I tell you, if you don't have a parent to read to the child, this is almost as good. And there is Shel Silverstein turning the pages and reading this book. So there are good things, we can find substitutes for, it's not quite as good, but sitting with your child in the room.
Yes.
I was recently sitting on an airplane and watching a family with kids watching videos on the airplane. And I had a Kindle, and so when I got off the airplane, I downloaded 3 picture books because I wanted to see what they looked like on the Kindle. And I myself was very disappointed. There's no color. You saw half a spread, so it didn't make sense, even though I then showed it to 3 or 4 young children and read it with them, and they were glued to the Kindle, completely held the Kindle, flipped the pages, and I showed them the real book and said, well, what if, it's not in color? And the answer from a 5-year-old was, someday it'll be in color.
Yes.
They'll make it. And someday they'll make it so you can see both sides of the pages, but it's okay for now. And I think maybe that our kids and grandkids and I want to know what you think about that, are going to adapt to this and still be readers in another way, even with picture books, even with the beauty of picture books. It won't be the same, but...
Well, we mourn a lot of things that aren't the same and that really aren't as good now as they used to be, so that might be one.
Anyway. Another question. Yeah.
That's really similar to the question I had, because we see technology advancing so rapidly, and even the iPhone has color capabilities that a Kindle wouldn't. But especially with graphic design, CGI, Flash, web design technologies, do you see the illustrative capacity of a children's book advancing into even like animated pages on a website or a purchased ebook? And would you, especially the illustrators of children's books, would you see that as a viable new kind of multimedia intersection for children, where the visuals maybe aren't as tactile, but they're even more visually engaging and high definition animation as you're reading the text as well?
It'll all be viable. the chief thing is it shouldn't be merely cute. It shouldn't be sloppy. It shouldn't be secondhand cliche imagination, that kind of thing. It shouldn't be having largely the purpose of selling things. If it's from somebody's heart, or a committee's heart even, beating in sync, and if it's it has quality and truth and imagination, sure. I maybe won't be able to get anything much out of it, but I won't be either.
You never know.
You never know. Yes.
Hi, I come from Mexico, which is a country that has an increasing interest on children's book, and I guess I came before the swine flu. And we've been seeing a growing of the publishing industry on children's book. I guess they're growing like 10%, 15% each year. But then parents are getting really nervous on the teenage section of the thing, because it's easy to involve children on reading. They just love it. And then at 10, 12, 11, something happens, and then parents really don't know what to do, and then they don't really know to which authors turn to, so that kids don't get uninterest on books. So what would you say as writers and people who are working with these books? What can parents do, or what can teachers do to avoid this blank page on the adulthood reader and the young reader?
I think the most honest answer should be that we should start writing good books for teenagers as well. But I must admit, this is an age I didn't like when I was a teenager myself. and somehow I don't have this desire to write for this age, maybe because my parents taught me read and write at the age of 3.5 or 4. So I read children books at this age. I read teenagers books at the age of 8 to 10, and then when I was 14 years old, my father gave me Lolita, who was just translated to Hebrew at that time, and I said, "But are you sure?" Because I knew it's a scandalous book, and he said, "Don't worry, don't worry. It's a good book. It's about a girl your age. Read it." And this was the book that made me a reader and a writer eventually, because at the age of 14 I was exposed to such excellence, to such brightness, to such a style, so polished, so cultured. So I never read such a thing before. The whole eroticism and the story of Lolita did not touch me at all. I mean, I was too young to feel anything. For me, to love a 14-year-old girl was very natural at that age. And I think that when my own children reached this age of 12 or 13, when you have no book to give them to read, I started to read them aloud the same way I did for them when they were 4. I started to read for them aloud novels for grown-ups before going to sleep, and this was the way I pushed them towards grown-ups books. I think we just skipped the teenagers' literature.
Meir, did you read them Lolita?
I gave them to read Lolita.
You didn't read it to them yourself, though.
Because the old translation of Lolita to Hebrew was not a good translation. But the two books I read to my daughter when she was 12, I read her Promise at Dawn, which I think is a great book to move into grown-up literature by Romain Gary in Hebrew, and then you won't believe it, I read her Moby Dick when she was 14, and my younger son, who was 5, was listening like this without understanding half of it, but he was, as you said, glued to the book. And then now they read. I mean, you have to invest an effort in this transition from childhood to adulthood, literary wise.
Do you have any final comments?
No, my father read Dickens to me, and it was huge. It was huge.
Yeah.
I mean, it made a huge difference.
My father read The Bridge of Sighs by Thomas Hood from the Paul Gray Golden Treasury. One more unfortunate gone to her death. I can only remember that.
My father read me nothing.
And it worked. But in your case,
I became my own best reader.
okay. In the interest of closing at exactly 5:30, which I believe we've achieved as a panel, I should thank you all very much for coming. If you'd like to buy books by the panelists, I believe you can purchase them and then sign them upstairs. Is that correct? And I'm asked to note that there are still many more festival events for you to attend. The 2009 festival programs are available at the membership table outside. And you can also find out everything you need to know about this year's festival and other PEN America Center news on our website, www.pen.org. And you can also sign up for our newsletter and stay current on all PEN news. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank all of our volunteers and our host venue for today, which is the Cervantes Institute. Thank you very much.